I used every single weapon in Monster Hunter Wilds, and today I'm going to put them into a tier list. Now, I can already hear you keyboard warriors out there, so listen. These are just my opinions. This is not me listing these weapons in order of their effectiveness, this is just a list of how much I personally liked the weapons. Sure, after 500 hours of using the hunting horn, you're probably pretty good with it, but maybe after only a few hours, I didn't find the value. Or did I? Alright, so let's put up the tier list with the top being S for supremely superb, and the bottom D for being, decently dull, or something. Here's the list of weapons in the game. We're going to go from left to right, so we'll cover all the weapons on the left first, and then work on the right side. This should give a nice mix of weapons instead of the back half being very ranged focused. First up, the Greatsword. The Greatsword is this insanely humongous sword that handles like a cement truck on ice skates. It's slow, it's heavy, but boy, when you hit something, it feels it. The idea of the Greatsword is to plant your feet and charge up your attacks for even more damage, resulting in a slow weapon being even slower. I'm not a huge fan of the speed of this particular weapon, but I can't deny that when you do land one of those supercharged attacks, it makes you feel things. Although sometimes landing those attacks can be a bit tricky.
Oh, he got one on his wing.
Yeah. Oh. Dibs!
Oh,
I missed! Oh no! Oh gosh! This sword is too heavy, man. It's a pretty simple weapon to use, but it does take some mastering to get your timing and positioning down. There's a 2-hit combo you can spam that is a bit quicker, but it doesn't have the satisfying crunch that the charged up attacks have. Overall, it's a good weapon, but not really my thing. C tier. Next up is the Sword and Shield. It's really hard to go wrong with this all-time classic video game weapon set. The Sword and Shield, unlike the Greatsword, is actually a very fast weapon. It's a relatively simple weapon on the surface and allows you to use certain items while your weapon is unsheathed. It's very beginner friendly, but its simplicity is just a deception. It's a very combo heavy weapon with a lot of different attacks for different situations. The shield works not only to block damage, but as a blunt weapon, causing extra stagger against a monster's head. There's combos for aerial attacks, grounded attacks, special attacks. There's just a lot you can do with the Sword and Shield, and it's a really fun weapon to master with all the tools at your disposal. The Sword and Shield is one of my personal favorite weapons. It's the jack of all trades, master of none. It's got a little something for every occasion, but it does require some practice to master its combos. I do love this weapon, but it undeniably takes more effort to deal the damage that other weapons do right out of the gate. For that reason, and that reason alone, it's a high A tier. The hammer sits in a very similar camp to the Greatsword where you charge your attacks, only this time you're much faster. Frankly, the hammer plays almost identically to the Greatsword, only with the ability to move while charging your attacks. That being said, there's only a handful of attacks that you can actually pull off with the hammer. A spin move, a jackhammer strike, and some basic combos are really your only options. This does mean that the hammer is really easy to pick up and play, but after a bit of time, I was looking for more combos that honestly just weren't there. It's a really fun weapon to use, and those charged attacks give the same tingly feeling as the Greatsword ones do, while being much more mobile. At the same time, the flexibility of this weapon just really wasn't there, and I was ready to move on pretty quickly. This is another C tier weapon. The Lance is one of the most defensive options in the Monster Hunter roster, which may have you thinking that this thing doesn't do a lot of damage. Don't think that. Look, the Lance is a really good weapon, right? I saw the power, I felt the power. Against one of the tougher monsters in the game, Gore Magala, I was not only dealing a fair bit of damage, but I was also blocking quite a bit. The only problem was, I was slow, like really slow. So slow that I found difficulties just keeping up with the monster to land some attacks. You're pretty much a walking tank without the convenience of a giant cannon. You gotta get up in there, and this thing being slow really hurt my ability to do so. The actual attacks aren't too bad once you do get close though. You're mixing various low and high strikes to pull off some surprisingly quick stabs. I don't really vibe with the attack patterns, but the sound effects do scratch my brain quite well. One of my buddies has been using the Lance to great effect, opening a lot of wounds and really focusing on certain monster parts. It works really well for him, but for me, it's a little awkward. I really didn't enjoy using the Lance, which makes this a very unfortunate D tier weapon. The Switch Axe is next, and honestly, this is one of my favorite weapons in the series. But something is just off this time. Don't get me wrong, I still love the switch axe. I think it's a ton of fun, and I really like having the quick moving axe mode to complement the heavier sword mode. But in Wilds, I don't know, I just didn't really care for it as much this time. What I think it comes down to is just the switch axe doesn't benefit from the additions of Wilds as much as some of the other weapons. The focus mode is sometimes helpful with the switch axe, but it's a pretty forgiving weapon when it comes to attack range and width, so aiming your attacks isn't always something you need. The wound attacks are fun, but it too doesn't really benefit the switch axe all that much. So while I still love using the switch axe, it doesn't really feel as fresh as some of the other weapons. It feels like you're using the same switch axe from Rise, which is not a bad thing per se, but it was a little underwhelming. Again, I really enjoyed this weapon, but under the context of Wilds, I don't think it quite keeps up with the competition. B tier, my love for this weapon keeps it from going any lower. The Insect Glaive. I've never really been an Insect Glaive kind of person, but this is the first time I've used the Insect Glaive and felt like I was kind of like getting it. The idea is to collect 3 different essences by sending your insect to attack certain parts of the monster. There's 2 really big changes here that streamline this weapon. Firstly, focus strikes will send your insect after the part you've attacked. Secondly, wound attacks will completely fill all 3 essences, full stop. So it's a lot easier to collect the essence you need to charge up. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good Insect Glaive user. Once you start collecting essence, you'll get boosted, either through more damage or more speed, stuff like that. In addition to that, essence will also give you bonus combos to use. If you collect all 3 though, you'll be able to use a huge attack that consumes all of your essence. And right there is my problem. I enjoy charging a weapon up, then going for a huge attack. That's just what I like to do. Unfortunately for me though, that's not really the best way to use the Insect Glaive. Because each essence opens up new attacks, you're really meant to use what you have at the time. Not me though, I was hyper focused on getting each essence and going for the all-in attack. Sometimes it would miss, sometimes it would hit, but all the time I was focused more on collecting the essence than actually damaging the monster we're fighting. It's a really fun weapon to use, but it's got a steep learning curve, and honestly, it is a little involved for my taste. It's a really strong and versatile weapon, but I suck with it. That's not necessarily the weapon's fault though, so I'll give it an A tier. This brings us to our first ranged weapon, the heavy bowgun. Unlike the previous weapon, the heavy bowgun is as straightforward as it gets. There's different types of ammo you can load to apply different effects, there's different types of tacks to launch different shells, but then there's the machine gun mode. Look, the heavy bowgun has a decent amount of applications. You can block, you can apply all kinds of effects, and you can even hit hard to reach wounds with it. But honestly, all I care about is the machine gun mode. That's what I'm after. Everything I do while I'm using this weapon is simply to charge another go with the machine gun. It's just so satisfying. I barely use the other ammo types. Load the pierce rounds, ready the machine gun, and start blasting. In a game about smacking monsters with increasingly large sticks, a machine gun is a nice change of pace and kind of makes you feel like Rambo. This weapon is an easy A tier on fun factor alone. Thankfully, it's also pretty good. The longsword. This massive katana is all about, you guessed it, charging it up. Land normal attacks to build spirit, then expend it on spirit attacks to level the weapon up. At level 3, the weapon goes into overcharge mode, boosting your damage, speed, and combos. It's a pretty satisfying weapon to use, but you do need to be careful with what attacks you actually use. Some attacks will expend a level, which will end your overcharge mode immediately. It also has a pretty big emphasis on counterattacks, which isn't really something I'm good at or interested in. Other than that though, it's a pretty solid weapon. It's another really good starter weapon since it attacks pretty fast and has a lot of easy combos. That being said, I didn't find many of the attacks to be all that satisfying. It just lacks a certain punch. Probably because it's slashing rather than impacting, but still. It's really fun and strong, but I don't see myself attempting to master this weapon anytime soon. Strong B tier. The dual blades. I'll just tell you this now, this is my favorite weapon. You're so fast and agile, and it's a really simple weapon to use. You go into demon mode, land attacks to charge the weapon, then both in and out of demon mode, your combos will be stronger. It's all about managing your gauge, as normal attacks will build it up in demon mode, then certain combos will drain it. Because the dual blades attack so fast, it's also one of the best weapons for applying effects to monsters, which is a really fun mechanic to play with. The speed of this weapon also allows you to target certain monster parts with ease. I could go on, but I won't. S tier, super easy to use and a ton of fun. Next up, the Hunting Horn. The Hunting Horn is all about using attacks to create a melody, then playing that melody to apply effects to monsters and fellow hunters. The Hunting Horn is easily the most diverse weapon in the roster. 2 different Hunting Horns can do completely different things. Some will heal, some will deal damage, and some will apply effects or buffs. It really is an insanely powerful weapon in that regard. Now, actually playing with the Hunting Horn took some getting used to. It's very unique, and you have to be very careful which buttons you press and when. I did come around to liking the horn after a while, especially the damage-related ones, but this is a weapon that I find a bit exhausting to use. If you used it a lot, I'm sure it would become second nature, but for me, it's a bit complicated for my liking. It's a really good weapon, though I don't find it the most fun. B tier. Where the lance had you being pretty much a walking tank, the Gunlance has you literally being a walking tank. You're just as slow and just as defensive, but now you cause explosions. For me personally, the Gunlance solves all of the issues I had with the lance. The basic shelling attacks give you a small hop, which you can use to reposition when a monster makes a turn or other finer movements. At the same time, I find the attacks to be all the more satisfying. Your shells, of course, will cause damage in an area, but you also have a wyvern stake to impale the monster with a barrage of damage. You can also charge up a heavy attack for a huge cluster of explosive damage. While the speed still leaves you in a bad position sometimes, the Gunlance has the range to make up for it. The damage this thing puts out is also insane, and it has some of the most satisfying attacks in the game. It deals damage, it blocks damage, and it has explosions. This is absolutely an S tier weapon. The charge blade on the surface looks similar to the switch axe, but unlike the switch axe, I actually really don't like the charge blade. This is probably the most complex weapon in the game, only closely met by the Hunting Horn. The charge blade complexity comes from managing the, get this, charges. You start with the basic sword and shield mode. Land attacks to build up a charge for your files, then deposit the charge to bank into your files. Then expend those files in axe mode. That's the basics, but there's also overcharging files, charging your sword and shield, and even overcharging your axe. As I mentioned earlier, I like to go for a big hit with the Monster Hunter weapons. I want to build up, then unleash a huge attack. The problem with the charge blade is that there's so much to do before you can get to those massive attacks. Is my sword charged? Is my shield charged? Are my files overcharged? Is my axe overcharged? Similar to the insect glaive, you're supposed to work with what you have at the time, while finding opportunities to charge the next in the list. But that's just not how I like to play. Once the stars do align, you can seriously put the hurt on some of these monsters. And even with just a few components charged, you can dish out some crazy numbers. The charge blade is so good, I just hate the way it plays. This is a D tier weapon for me. Again, no correlation to the actual effectiveness of the weapon, since this thing saws through anything. The smaller brother to the heavy bowgun, the light bowgun is exactly what you'd expect. A faster, more agile, multi-ammo ranged weapon. Where I really enjoyed the pierce ammo on the heavy bowgun for the machine gun, here with the burst mode of the light gun, I actually found a lot of fun with the spread ammo. The light bowgun deals a respectable amount of damage, and without the ability to block like the heavy bowgun, you're going to want to be on the move anyway, so being a bit closer for the spread ammo isn't really a problem. While I did enjoy using the light bowgun, quite frankly, I simply prefer the heavy bowgun. They're very similar, one's faster, one's slower, and they use slightly different shells. It's good, but again, it's not the Rambo machine gun. I don't think I'll ever use the light bowgun over the heavy bowgun, but the light one wasn't too bad. C tier. This brings us to the final weapon in the roster, the bow. Instead of ammo, the bow uses arrow coatings, which you can build up charge for by charging shots. You can also fire tracer arrows, which will make all of your arrows home in on wherever the tracer is. It's a pretty fun weapon to use, and it can deal a ton of damage, but there's one thing that really takes this weapon to the next level. The Dragon Piercer. This is an attack that will shoot through a monster and repeatedly deal damage as it passes through them. This is a very strong attack, and you can spam it over and over. What really makes this attack special is just the sound and impact it has. It's the ultimate dopamine hit, and it never gets old. The bow is pretty simple to use, and there's a wide range of attacks you can use for different scenarios. You'll cause a lot of damage numbers, and those numbers will often be quite substantial. The bow is insanely fun, and it is a great secondary weapon for a versatile backup. This 100% is an S tier weapon. Well, that's all the weapons. I know some of you are foaming at the mouth with rage right now. Honestly, you probably didn't even make it to this point. You've probably already commented and closed the video. Either way, this is just a personal preference to all these, and I think it accurately represents how I like each weapon. But of course, this is just one person's opinion. Let me know your favorite Monster Hunter weapons down in the comments. Until next time.